os Estados Unidos conseguem imprimir bilhões de dólares do nada sem sofrer nenhuma consequência? Como os banqueiros dominam nossas vidas, muitas vezes de forma ilegal? Como os Estados Unidos conseguiram fazer o mundo assinar um contrato em 1944, se desfazendo desse mesmo contrato em 1971? Como nasceram os petrodólares e o que acontece com os países que tentam desafiar a hegemonia desses bilhetes verdes? Essa é uma incrível história de como os Estados Unidos conseguiram criar um império em torno do dólar. Me dê o controle sobre o dinheiro da nação e eu não me importarei com quem faz suas leis. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, um alemão que foi fundador da famosa dinastia Rothschild. No século XVIII, esse banqueiro começou a ter ideias de como dominar o mundo inteiro. E seu desejo se tornou realidade. Os banqueiros nos Estados Unidos tinham claro de que deveriam criar uma estrutura, um banco privado para que imprimisse dinheiro para que pudesse dar ao governo como empréstimo, cobrando uma porcentagem de juros. O início do século XX, Estados Unidos foi marcado por uma sucessão de crises financeiras. Em 1907, durante um colapso financeiro dos Estados Unidos, John Morgan, o fundador da JP Morgan, convocou 120 banqueiros de Nova York à biblioteca de sua mansão. Foi onde começaram a dar forma a um plano que dura até os dias de hoje. 3 anos mais tarde, em 1910, um grupo de políticos e economistas voltaram a se reunir em segredo com o objetivo de terminar de desenhar um sistema bancário central. E foi quando, em 1913, as ideias de Rothschild tomaram forma por completo. Foi quando, no dia 23 de dezembro de 1913, quando todos estavam distraídos com as festas de Natal, eis que surge a Reserva Federal, o Fed.
The Federal Reserve System is a strange creature. It's easier to say what it is not than what it is. Most people think it's a government agency. It is not. Those who have studied it say, well, wait a minute, this is a private banking corporation. You almost get half credit for that, but it's not really a private corporation either. It's a hybrid. And to make it more complicated, we can say it is a cartel. It's a group of very large and powerful private banking interests who have gotten together in a cartel arrangement, and they brought the federal government into it as a partner in order to use the force of law to enforce the cartel agreement. You see, with most cartels, if a member of the cartel wants to break out or violate the agreement, if they fixed prices, for example, and one of the members of the cartel wants to raise the prices contrary to the agreement, there's no way for them to discipline the member of the cartel and force him to stick with the agreements. But if you bring the government into the arrangement and convert the agreement into law, now all members are required by law to keep the agreement, or they go to jail. When I first became interested in the topic of the Federal Reserve System, I was aware that the Fed was formed not in Washington, D.C., not in the halls of Congress or some meeting room, but it was formed on a private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. That's the reason I called my book The Creature from Jekyll Island, because here it was a strange thing that something as important as the Federal Reserve System was created on a private island off the coast of Georgia. That aroused my curiosity. I didn't think too much about it until I got into the details of the history, and what I found was absolutely amazing. First of all, this island in those days was privately owned. It was a resort island. It was a club. They called the Jekyll Island Club. And its members were a relatively small group of billionaires from New York, people like J.P. Morgan and William Rockefeller and their business associates and their families. And they went there during the cold winter months because they wanted to get away from the ice and snow from New York. And so Jekyll Island in those days was a private resort, And they had a beautiful clubhouse there. In fact, it's still standing for anybody who wants to go there and visit it. The island has been preserved in many of these cottages, which they called them in those days, which were the summer resort homes of the very wealthy, are still there, and you can visit them, and it's quite an example of the elegance and opulence of the turn of the century. But the key feature is the clubhouse. And the clubhouse is where this meeting took place. And I thought, isn't that strange? And I got into it and I discovered that not only did they go to this island for the meeting, but they went under conditions of great secrecy. I can assure you that very few wars of history have ever been plotted under conditions of greater secrecy than that. For example, when they went to the island, they all traveled aboard the private railroad car of Senator Nelson Aldrich. He sent his railroad car to the New Jersey Railroad Station. This was November of 1910. And he and 6 other men, who I'll describe in a moment, arrived under conditions that they were told they mustn't be seen together. They couldn't come together. They couldn't dine together on that evening. And they must avoid newspaper reporters at all costs, because in those days, newspaper reporters used to hang out at the New Jersey Railroad Station because it was a way to catch photographs or interviews of famous people coming in and out of New York. And they were told to avoid newspaper reporters. One of them carried a shotgun in a big black case. Just in case he had been confronted by a reporter, he was prepared to tell them that he was going on a duck hunting trip. And the funny thing about that is that we learned later from his children and his biographers that this man never owned a gun. He had borrowed that shotgun just as a decoy and as part of the deception. When they got on board this railroad car, they were told, even in the privacy of this car, not to address each other by last names, first names only. And 2 of them even went further and refused to address each other by first names. They adopted code names. And I thought, well, that seems strange, even in the privacy of Senator Aldrich's car. Well, it turned out that one of the men wrote about it in later years, and he said the reason for that is that they were concerned that the identities of all of these 7 men might be known to the servants on board the car, and that the servants might talk about it. And in that fashion, the word would get out, and then, of course, the purpose of the meeting would have been defeated in their opinions. And so this is the kind of secrecy that surrounded that. Even when they got to the island, and then they got off the train and took the ferry across the inland straits there and went to the clubhouse, they had replaced all of the normal servants with new servants who didn't know any of these people. This is the kind of precautions that went on. And they created the Federal Reserve under those kinds of conditions of secrecy. And then when they came back to New York, and disappeared back into the environs of Wall Street, for quite a while thereafter, these men denied that such a meeting ever took place. They said, oh, no, that's just pure rumor. That's nonsense. Later, it began to leak out, and they said, yes, we went to the meeting, but we just went to do some hunting and play some poker and drink some good whiskey, that kind of thing, you know. Finally, after the Federal Reserve System was firmly established and became accepted and almost revered in the eyes of Americans as a great American institution, then they finally began to talk about this meeting, who was there, how they went, and why the secrecy. And most of this is now written in their memoirs or in their biographies or in interviews they gave with newspaper reporters and that sort of thing, so that if you go to any well-stocked library today, you can learn in minute detail exactly what happened on Jekyll Island, why they went, who these people were, and especially you will learn why the secrecy. Now, what is the reason for the secrecy? In those days, there was a great deal of concern among the American people about the concentration of financial power in the hands of a few very wealthy and powerful financial interests in Wall Street. They called this the money trust in those days. If you look into the editorials of the time, you'll often find editorials condemning the money trust. And the cry in those days was to break the grip of the money trust. And one of the primary purposes of the Federal Reserve Act, as it was promoted to the American people, was just that, to break the grip of the money trust. They were going to write a law that was going to take the power away from these people and put it in the hands of their trustworthy politicians, you see. Put it in the hands of the people through the electoral process. That was the propaganda behind the Federal Reserve System. So what's the purpose of the secrecy? It's because when you look at the list of these people who went, they were the money trust. They were the representatives of the banks, of J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers. They represented Kuhn, Loeb and Company. They had connections, business relations with the Warburgs in Germany and the Netherlands and the Rothschilds in England. This was the money trust, not only of the United States, but of the world. These are the people who created the Federal Reserve System, supposedly to break the grip of their own power. You see. So now, had that fact been known, who these people were that were drafting the Federal Reserve System, the trick would have been exposed, and the public never would have adopted the Federal Reserve Act as, in fact, they did.
O próprio presidente Woodrow Wilson, que tinha compromisso com os banqueiros que financiaram sua campanha, reconheceu logo seu grave erro. Sou o homem mais infeliz. Sem querer, arruinei meu país. Uma nação industrial está controlada por um sistema de crédito. O crescimento da nação está em mãos de um punhado de homens, de banqueiros. Chegamos a ser um dos governos mais controlados e dominados do mundo civilizado. Depois disso, Estados Unidos nunca voltaram a ser o mesmo. É um país que passou a ser dominado por uma pequena elite de banqueiros. Uma elite que conhecia muito bem o poder da opinião pública e passou a ter o controle disso também através de líderes religiosos, pedindo a esses que incluíssem em seus sermões palavras otimistas que fizessem com que os fiéis tivessem plena confiança no governo. Tiveram também um grande detalhe com a escolha do nome, chamando de Reserva Federal, para que ninguém pensasse que se tratava de um banco privado, pois ao escutar o nome federal, parecia que pertencia ao governo, o que estava muito longe da realidade.